Hey guys, Dustin here, and welcome to another episode of Horroritis. Today we are talking about Nightbreed, and I've done Nightbreed before, but this time we're comparing the theatrical cut to the Cabal cut. For those of you that don't know, the Cabal cut of Nightbreed is basically, it's a cut of the movie with all of the deleted scenes added back in. So it doesn't make it like a comprehensive or perfect cut of the movie as you might think. There's actually a director's cut that does a better job of making a cohesive film out of deleted and extended scenes. This just has all the cut stuff thrown back in. So today I'm going to go through both of them. I'm going to compare scenes between the theatrical cut and the Cabal cut and see which scenes were better. Were the scenes taken out justified? Were the reshoots justified? What makes a better movie? And hopefully this will be fun. After the opening scene of Monsters at Midian, Boone wakes up from a nightmare and Laurie is there to comfort him. Since they're in the same bed and Laurie's in her underwear, we can infer that they're in a relationship. After the opening scene, we see Boone at work. Laurie shows up and establishes their relationship by gratuitous makeout session. We also learn that Laurie performs at a club, which is only relevant because of another scene later on in the movie, which was also removed from the theatrical cut. In the theatrical cut, all the relevant information is given to us before anybody even speaks. We understand that Boone has nightmares. We understand that Boone and Laurie are in a relationship. The relationship setup is more emotionally satisfying because we see that Laurie cares about Boone and Boone also cares for Laurie. Whereas in the Cabal cut, the relationship seems more physical considering all they do is make out and grope each other, and neither of them seems very good at it. In the same scene we're introduced to Laurie, we also learn that someone named Decker has been calling Boone, and Boone has been avoiding the calls. We find out that Decker is a therapist that Boone had been seeing, and that Boone is better and doesn't think he needs therapy anymore. Laurie convinces him to go back and see Decker and explain all of this to him. We see Boone answering the phone with Decker on the other line. We immediately see Decker set up as the bad guy, as the first thing he does is try to gaslight Boone until he agrees to come meet him. After the call, we see Decker acting extra creepy, which removes almost all doubt that we've just been introduced to the villain.
God help us both.
We then cut to Boone and Laurie at Laurie's place. There's literally no new information given here, and the chemistry seems forced and awkward. This leads me to believe that the theatrical scene was actually a reshoot because the chemistry there seems more natural and they seem to feel more comfortable with each other. Again, everything we need to know is set up naturally in one scene. The fact that Decker is the bad guy hasn't been spoon-fed to us yet, which lets us keep guessing for a while as suspense builds. This one theatrical scene saved somewhere around 3 minutes of runtime. In the Cabal cut, there's an extra scene where the police show up to the murder scene, the murder that we see in both cuts of the movie, and it's revealed there that this wasn't a one-time thing and that this killer is known for taking out entire families. This is unnecessary since in the very next scene, Decker tries to give this same information to Boone when he tries to convince him that he's actually the killer. Of course, in the Cabal cut, we already knew this because they already spoon-fed us that Decker is the bad guy. This scene, all in all, is completely unnecessary as we get all of the information that we got here somewhere else. In the scene where Boone goes to see Decker, both cuts are essentially the same, except in the Cabal cut there is an extra scene where Boone starts sobbing after Decker tries to pin the murders on him. You could tell this scene was cut early because of the massive quality difference, but overall it doesn't really impact the film one way or the other, aside from adding a hint, a little more than a hint of desperation to Boone. After Decker gives Boone some pills, Boone, being drugged up, wanders out into oncoming traffic. After getting pills from Decker, Boone goes home, sets a bunch of his stuff on fire, hallucinates a sex scene between him and Laurie, takes a shower, stumbles into the club where Laurie's performing to probably the least enthusiastic crowd I've ever seen. Before then walking out and stumbling into oncoming traffic. While some of the extra stuff here shows the effects of the pills on Boone, it mostly just slows down the pacing, with the nightclub scene being pretty cringy. After passing out at Midian, Boone wakes up to Onaka's dog in his face. We briefly see Onaka before he slips away, and Boone wanders around for a second until Kinski shows up and puts a knife to his throat. After Onaka slips away with his dog, Kinski shows up and fights with Boone for a little bit before finally getting behind Boone and putting the knife to his throat. From a story standpoint, this scene doesn't really change anything, but it's cool, and I like that it shows Boone as a fighter, even though we still get to see him throw some punches a few minutes later. After Boone's killed outside of Midian, he's taken to the morgue. We see clips of Laurie being interrogated. Then we cut back to see the bite on Boone's body. It becomes all lightning-y, and then all the autopsy tools fall to the floor. And then we see a broken window, implying that Boone has reanimated and escaped. In the Cabal cut, we're shown Boone's body actually going through the window, and we're also given an extra scene where the detectives come in to find that the body is missing. Actually seeing Boone's body go through the window really clears up what's exactly happening here, and the extra little bit with the detectives coming in kind of button up the whole thing quite nicely. After Boone's body disappears, Laurie decides to go to Midian to find him. She stops off at a bar on the way where she meets Cheryl Ann, who takes a liking to her and accompanies her to Midian. There's an extra scene where Laurie and Cheryl Ann are drinking, and Laurie basically gives Cheryl Ann the entire story, and for whatever weird reason, Cheryl Ann accepts this and decides she wants to help Laurie. Laurie decides to get a room for the night. Cheryl Ann decides she's going to stay in the bar and try to pick up a dude, which she actually does. The extra scene between Laurie and Cheryl Ann clears up why Cheryl Ann decided to go with Laurie in the first place, and how she knows Decker, even though we kind of figure it out later, but just this little bit of information makes it easier and much clearer. Laurie comes across Babette in Midian. She's out in the sun and dying. Rachel begs Laurie to save Babette, which she does. She then meets Louwsburg, who basically tells her there's nothing they can do for her and she should leave. They all retreat back down below Midian, and Laurie sneaks in behind them. When Laurie finds Babette, she immediately picks her up, even though she is in monster form. There's a bunch of exposition in the form of Laurie half talking to herself and half talking to Babette. When Rachel shows up, she has an oddly different voice from the theatrical cut. Laurie gives Babette to Rachel, and then Louwsburg appears. In this cut, there's a lot more back and forth between Laurie and Louwsburg about where Boone is and why she can't see him. All of the extra talking and exposition in the Cabal cut really slows down the pacing of the movie. In the theatrical cut, we're given everything we need to know in a timely manner, which allows the movie to move on to the next bit. When Boone stops Decker from killing Laurie, Decker stabs Boone, which does nothing, and Boone gets Decker in a chokehold. Narcissa shows up and asks Boone if he's going to kill Decker. Once Boone has Decker in a chokehold, Decker breaks down and says the mask makes him kill people and he had to frame Boone or the cops would catch him. Before Boone says, "You picked the wrong man," Narcissa shows up and tells Boone he's not a man. Boone corrects the statement and adds monster instead. Then the scene moves on. Decker's sudden breakdown kind of betrays everything we know about Decker. He's cold, he's calculated, he's uncaring. This just feels unnatural to the character that's been set up for us. Maybe it could have been just to fake out Boone, but it still just feels wrong. In the Cabal cut, after Boone saves Laurie, Lylesburg tries to kick Boone out of Midian. Boone pulls a Karen and wants to speak to Lylesburg's manager.
Who made this law?
Baphomet. Who made Midian?
Well, I guess I'll have to have a talk with this guy.
We then get a brief introduction and explanation of who Baphomet is and why he's important. This scene just works. It introduces us to somebody who plays a larger role in the third act, which is just good storytelling. Of course, we do get an introduction to Baphomet in a little bit later with Laurie, but this scene is still really good, and it doesn't make the next scene feel redundant in any way. So, yeah, it all works together really well. In the Cabal cut, we get extra footage in the scene where Laurie wakes up in a coffin. Babette and Rachel are there waiting for her. We learn that Laurie has a special bond with Babette now that she held her during her transformation. They now can apparently see through each other's eyes if they want. This concept is touched on a little bit later, but never really expanded on. We get a little bit of a flashback, but other than that, they don't really use this for a whole lot, which I think is a shame. I think this could have been a bigger part of the movie. I mean, this movie kind of feels like a horror version of the X-Men as is, and I think this would have pushed it, I don't know, maybe a little too far, which is probably maybe why they cut it. I'm not sure, but I feel like, everybody's got almost like their own little superpowers, and this would have been a cool one too. There's also an added scene in the Cabal cut where Laurie is confronted by Lylesburg. There's really no new information added here, no new scenery, and no real conflict at all. She just kind of pushes past him and he does nothing. The Cabal cut has an extra scene where the chief gives a press conference. During the press conference, he's asked about Boone being shot down at Midian, which he knew nothing about. With this scene, it makes much more sense as to why the chief confronts Decker in the way he does.
What the hell are you trying to do to me? I don't understand what the hell's going on around here. Now, how many bullets did they pull out of that geek up in Midian?
The theatrical cut also has a scene that's missing from the Cabal cut, where Boone is sitting in his cell and Ashbury next door starts talking to him. This introduces Ashbury and how he feels about Midian and the monsters who live there, and really kind of sets up his role for later on in the movie. In the Cabal cut, we get a scene where Laurie is psychically contacted by Babette to let her know that Midian is in trouble. While I like that they used the psychic link in this situation, really, what was Laurie going to do in this situation? The whole thing was kind of pointless. There's also an extended scene with the police in the cemetery where they touch on the rules of engagement. Along with giving us a view of a few extra monsters we hadn't seen yet, this footage feels like it fits, and I can only imagine that it was cut to save time. In the Cabal cut, we get an extended Armory scene with a character that seems to have been wiped completely from the theatrical cut. While I know that the Sons of the Free play a bigger part in the Midian universe, and the guy that loves his weapons almost to a sexual level was more featured in the story that this movie is based on, I think a lot of the overtly sexual tones that you find in Clive Barker's work were actually toned down for the theatrical release of this movie, even though there's plenty of sexual undertones still there. And for that point, I think that a guy that sexually fetishizes his weapons probably wasn't right for the theatrical cut of this movie. In the Cabal cut, after the Armory scene, we get extended footage of the stereotypical redneck militia gearing up to go to Midian. The extra footage here didn't actually accomplish anything. We got all of the rowdiness and everything we need to know about these guys from the theatrical footage. There's also a scene with Laurie in the car with Narcissa and Rachel where she learns that Boone is the only guy ever to actually talk to Baphomet and survive. This extra information actually helps explain why Rachel and Narcissa would risk their necks to break Boone out of jail when they know that Midian is under attack. In the Cabal cut, the scene where Laurie goes into the cell to get Boone plays out quite a bit differently from the theatrical. In the Cabal cut, Boone doesn't want to go, and Laurie gives him a rousing speech about needing to save Midian and protecting the breed. At this point, she sounds like she's ready to see a recruiter about joining the monsters. This is, of course, foreshadowing of the alternate ending, which we'll be coming to in a bit. There's also an extended makeout session where Boone begins to transform before Narcissa interrupts them, and Boone is now 100% on board. In the theatrical cut, there's no speech. Laurie walks in, tells Boone she's not afraid of him, then they start kissing, Narcissa interrupts them, and that is the end of the scene. Without the speech, this scene is more about Laurie accepting her situation. We see she starts kissing Boone and she pulls back to see that he's transformed, and then she goes right back into kissing him. This is emotionally more satisfying as we get to see her begin her acceptance instead of already being there. In the Cabal cut, we see a lot more of Ashbury wandering around while the militia rigs the cemetery to explode. Ashbury ultimately comes to the conclusion that the monsters aren't evil and they're making a mistake. The chief decides not to listen as they move ahead as planned. This scene fleshes out the character and really makes the reason for his actions later on a little more clear. Decker is opening his case with his mask and knife when the detective confronts him. He takes the straight razor out and kills the detective with it. Pretty straightforward. In the Cabal cut, Decker has the case open because the mask talks to him, encouraging him to kill. The detective walks up on Decker, having a crazy person conversation with his mask, so Decker slashes him with the razor. While this concept is still cool, it goes against the established character of Decker. Not to mention, an hour 44 into the Cabal cut and an hour 16 into the theatrical cut is probably the wrong time to start exploring this aspect of Decker's personality. The biggest difference between the two cuts of the fight at Midian is that the Cabal cut has a lot more footage of the militia running rampant through Midian, killing the monsters. With this, we see a lot more of the monsters than in the theatrical cut. While all of the extra footage is really cool, there's still way too much of it. So if there was like a happy medium where you get some of the footage but not quite all of it, I think that would be better. I mean, you only really need so many shots of rednecks and trucker caps running back and forth. In the Cabal cut, Ashbury denounces his religion in order to gain access to Midian and join the monsters. When he does this, Boone escorts him inside. In the theatrical cut, when Boone confronts Ashbury, he only tells him to run, which Ashbury does. Watching Ashbury do a complete 180 from the first time we saw him is a really cool transformation to see. It also gives depth to the character and clears up some of the motivations for his actions later on. Stop motion cheetah and dinosaur. That is all. In the Cabal cut, Decker chases Laurie through the cemetery. Narcissa steps in and Decker cuts his head off with virtually no effort. No. Just no. There's also a scene in the Cabal cut where the chief finds Ashbury, who is burned from the Baphomet incident. Ashbury declares his intention to hunt them all down and make them pay, and then he kills the chief. This is a nice cap to Ashbury's story, where he does a complete 180 from the beginning and then yet another 180 from that point, and also sets up the last line of the movie, which has perfect sequel potential, I would think. Midian blows up and we cut to a barn in the middle of a field. We see the remaining monsters inside, then we see Narcissa hugging and saying goodbye to Boone and Laurie. Midian explodes and we cut to Boone and Laurie on top of a hill. Boone explains to Laurie that he had to go and that he'll come back for her. She doesn't like the idea of growing old while Boone doesn't, so she begs him to turn her. He refuses, so she stabs herself in the stomach with Decker's knife. Boone bites her before she dies, and moments later she's resurrected. We then cut to the barn, where Krinsky and Rachel explain to Babette that Boone is now Cabal, and he will come back for them one day. Then cut back to Boone and Laurie just standing on the hill like they're posing for a really awkward family portrait. This is another situation where combining the two would give us a better result. If we took the Cabal ending and then added in the final shot of Narcissa with Boone and Laurie, I think we would be in good shape. There's a scene in both cuts where Ashbury uses some of Baphomet's holy water to resurrect Decker. In the theatrical cut, we see this right before the credits roll, and in the Cabal cut, it's at the very end of the credits. This works equally well in both spots, and neither one seems to be stronger than the other. So that's it. That's my comparison of Nightbreed, the theatrical cut, versus Nightbreed, the Cabal cut. Like I said before, there is a cohesive movie to be made out of all of this extra footage, and I believe that is Nightbreed, the director's cut, which I did not add in here, but if you'd like me to take a closer look at that in the future, maybe I will. If you like this video, give it a like, hit the subscribe button, all that good stuff. You can find us here on YouTube, BitChute, and Facebook, and that is it. So until next time, I'm Dustin, this was Horroritis, and as always, keep it creepy.